I have sat in a lot of chairs over the years. Some were behind a metal desk at the precinct in Chicago. Others were in cramped interrogation rooms with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. And for a long time now, it has been that chair on my stage. But the chair does not change the man sitting in it, and it definitely does not change the truth. People think they can come onto my show and sell me a version of reality that fits their needs, a version where they are not the monster. They think because I am on television, it is all just for the cameras, a performance for the ratings. They are wrong. When I look at someone across from me, I am not looking at a guest. I am looking at a person who has to answer for what they have done. I spent years walking the streets as a cop. I have seen the worst things one human being can do to another, and I have developed a gut instinct that has not failed me yet. You can see the lie in the way they will not hold eye contact or the way they over-explain the smallest, most insignificant details to distract from the big, ugly fact sitting right in the middle of the room. I do not have time for the games. I do not have the patience for the I do not knows and the maybe it was this way or the I would never hurt a fly. When a child is involved, my patience hits zero before I even walk out through those doors. I have heard every excuse in the book. I have heard about falls from couches that should not break bones. I have heard about toddlers who supposedly have the strength of grown men. It is all noise. My job, my life's work really, is to cut through that noise and find the person responsible. Because at the end of the day, that baby does not have a voice. That baby cannot stand up and point a finger at the person who hurt them. So I have to be that voice. I have to be the one who demands the truth, even if I have to drag it out of them. I remember the day I got the file for this specific case. It sat on my desk, a heavy stack of papers that felt like lead in my hands. I do not just read these files, I feel them. I looked at the medical reports for a 7-month-old boy named Liam. This child had a spiral fracture in his arm and bruising on his ribs that looked like fingerprint marks. You do not get a spiral fracture from a baby rolling off a bed. A spiral fracture comes from a twisting motion, a forceful, violent wrenching of the limb. It takes a significant amount of deliberate force to break a child's bone like that. I looked at the photos and I felt that old familiar burn in my chest. It is the same burn I felt as a young officer when I would respond to a domestic call and see a victim cowering in a corner. It is the burn of injustice. The mother, a woman named Vanessa, and her boyfriend Corey were blaming each other, or rather, Vanessa was saying she did not know what happened, and Corey was saying it must have happened while he was at work. But the timeline the doctors provided did not match their stories. Someone was lying. Someone looked at that helpless, innocent infant and decided to take their frustration out on him. When I walked out onto that stage, the atmosphere was thick. You could feel the tension radiating off the two of them. Vanessa sat on one end of the chairs, looking small, her eyes red from crying. Corey sat on the other, his jaw set, his arms folded tight across his chest. He had that look, the look of a man who thinks he is smarter than everyone else in the room. I have seen that look on 1,000 faces in handcuffs. I did not start with the pleasantries. I do not do that. I looked at Vanessa first. I asked her how she could sit in her house, hearing her child scream, and not know exactly what happened. She started with, I was in the other room and I thought he was just cranky. I cut her off. I told her that a bone breaking makes a sound. A child experiencing that level of pain does not just crank, they scream in a way that haunts your sleep. I told her I knew she was hiding something, whether it was her own guilt or her fear of the man sitting next to her. Then I turned to Corey. I did not raise my voice yet. I kept it low, steady, the way I used to talk to suspects when I wanted them to think I was on their side, just long enough for them to slip up. I asked him about his temper. I asked him what happens when he gets tired after a long shift and the baby will not stop crying. He gave me that smug smile, the one that makes my blood boil. He told me he loves that kid like his own. I told him to save the garbage for someone who believes it. I told him I had seen the medical reports, and those reports do not show love. They show a victim. They show a crime scene that happened inside his own home. The thing about people who hurt children is that they always think they can justify it in their own heads. They tell themselves it was an accident or that the child was being difficult, but there is no such thing as a difficult 7-month-old. There is only a child who needs care and an adult who fails to provide it. As I sat there looking at Corey, I could see the cracks starting to form. He was blinking too fast. He was shifting in his seat. I pushed harder. I asked him why he was the only one home during the window of time that doctors said the injury most likely occurred. He started to stammer. He tried to shift the blame back to Vanessa, saying she was unstable. That is a classic move. Blame the mother. Make her look like the crazy one so you look like the protector. But I have been doing this too long to fall for the oldest trick in the book. I looked him dead in the eye and I told him, "You think you're tough? You think putting your hands on a baby makes you a man?" The audience was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa was sobbing now, her head in her hands. I could see the conflict in her. She wanted to protect her boyfriend, but she knew what he had done. She was trapped between a misplaced loyalty and the biological instinct to protect her son. It is a disgusting place to be, and I told her that. I told her that by staying silent, she was just as responsible for those broken bones as the person who broke them. I told her that if she did not step up and tell the truth, she was failing her son in the worst way possible. The confrontation continued, and the air in the studio felt like it was being sucked out. I did not give them an inch. I do not believe in soft landings for people who allow children to be harmed. Every time Corey tried to deflect, I brought it back to the physical evidence. I held up the photos of the bruises. I made him look at them. He tried to turn his head away, but I would not let him. I told him to look at what he did or what he allowed to happen. I wanted him to feel the weight of it. I wanted the reality of that child's pain to occupy every bit of space in his mind. He started getting angry, which is exactly what I wanted. When people get angry, they stop being careful. They stop rehearsing their lies, and they start showing you who they really are. His voice got louder, his gestures more aggressive. He started shouting about how I was attacking him and how he did not have to sit there and take it. I told him he could leave whenever he wanted, but he would be leaving as a coward who could not face the truth. He stayed. They always stay. Because deep down, they want to see if they can beat the system. They want to see if they can lie well enough to get away with it one more time. But not on my watch, not today. I watched Corey's hands. He was gripping the arms of the chair so hard, his knuckles were white. A telltale sign of someone trying to keep a lid on an explosion. I have seen that physical tension 1,000 times in the back of a squad car. It is the body's way of trying to contain the truth when the mind is running out of places to hide it. I turned my back on him for a second to look at Vanessa. She was shaking, her eyes darting between me and Corey like a trapped animal. I told her straight out that she was at a crossroads. I told her that she could either be a mother or she could be a girlfriend, but in this room, she could not be both. Not when her son was lying in a hospital bed with the bone twisted until it snapped. I asked her point blank if she was afraid of him. She didn't answer right away, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that filled the gaps between her gasps for air. I leaned in close, right into her personal space, and I told her that I could protect her, but I couldn't protect a liar. I needed her to tell me what happened when the cameras weren't rolling and the lights were off. She started to murmur something about Corey having a short fuse sometimes, and I saw Corey's head snap toward her. The look he gave her was pure ice. It was a warning. I didn't let him speak. I stepped right into his line of sight, blocking him from intimidating her. I told him to keep his eyes on me. I told him he was the one on the hot seat, not her. He started rambling again, trying to explain that the spiral fracture happened because the baby's arm got caught in the crib slats. I've heard that one before. I told him I'd spoken to orthopedic surgeons, and they all said the same thing. Crib slats don't cause spiral fractures in a 7-month-old. It takes a human hand, a grip, and a violent rotation. I asked him how it felt to hear his son's bone snap. I asked him if he felt like a big man then. He started to sweat. The arrogance was starting to leak out of him, replaced by a desperate, cornered energy. He tried to claim he wasn't even in the room when it happened, but then he tripped over his own words, mentioning that the baby wouldn't stop crying after he changed his diaper. I caught it instantly. I asked him, if you weren't in the room, how do you know he didn't stop crying after the diaper change? He froze. You could see the gears grinding in his head, trying to find a way to fix the leak in his story, but the more he talked, the more water he took on. That is the moment when the shift happens. It is the moment when the story they have rehearsed 100 times in front of the mirror starts to crumble under the weight of actual logic. I moved on to the polygraph. I had the results in my hand, and I let them sit there on the table between us for a moment. I didn't open the envelope right away. I wanted them to stew in it. I told them that the machine doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't care about their excuses or their rough childhoods. It only cares about the physiological response to a lie. I looked at Corey and asked him if he was nervous. He tried to act tough, saying he didn't put much stock in voodoo science, but I could see his pulse jumping in his neck. I told him that I've seen the polygraph be right more times than I can count, and it was about to pull the rug out from under someone in this room. I turned to Vanessa and asked her if she wanted to change her story before I opened that envelope. She just kept crying, saying she didn't know. She just didn't know. It's a pathetic defense, the I don't know defense. It's a way to absolve yourself of responsibility without technically lying. But in my book, failing to know what is happening to your own child is a sin in itself. I opened the envelope slowly. I made sure they heard the sound of the paper tearing. I looked at the results, though I already knew what they would say. My gut had told me the truth within the first 5 minutes of meeting them. I looked at Corey and I told him the examiner asked him 2 very specific questions. Number 1, did you intentionally cause the injuries to Liam? Number 2, do you know for a fact who injured Liam? I paused, letting the weight of the moment hang over the audience. Corey was staring at the envelope like it was a loaded gun. I told him he failed both questions. The room exploded. The audience erupted in a mix of gasps and boas, but I kept my eyes locked on Corey. He didn't even try to deny it at first. He just slumped back in his chair, the mask finally slipping. Then the anger came back. It was a defensive, ugly anger. He started screaming that the test was rigged, that I was out to get him because he was a young guy trying to make it. I didn't buy a second of it. I stood up and got right in his face. I told him the only person out to get him was himself, because he couldn't control his temper with a defenseless infant. Vanessa was hysterical now, screaming at him, asking him how he could do it. But I wasn't done with her either. I turned on her and asked her why it took a polygraph test on a television show for her to finally face the truth. I asked her how many times she saw him get rough with that baby and look the other way. I told her that her son was in a cast because she chose a man over her own flesh and blood. That is the hardest part of this job, seeing the betrayal of the person who is supposed to be the ultimate protector. A mother's supposed to be a sanctuary, but for Liam, his home was a minefield. I told Vanessa that she was lucky the state hadn't taken the child away yet, but if I had anything to say about it, she would have to prove she deserved to be a mother every single day for the rest of her life. She was shaking her head, saying she loved Liam, but I told her love is a verb, it's an action, it's the act of keeping him safe, and she had failed at the one job that mattered. Corey was still trying to argue, trying to say that he accidentally gripped the arm too hard because the baby was squirming. I didn't let him finish the sentence. I told him there is no such thing as accidentally breaking a baby's arm with a spiral fracture. You have to twist. You have to apply sustained, agonizing pressure. I told him he was a bully. He didn't pick on someone his own size. He picked on someone who couldn't even walk. I told him that in the world I come from, the guys in the yard don't take kindly to people who hurt kids. I told him he should be grateful he was sitting on my stage and not in a cell yet, because his time was coming. I could see the realization finally hitting him. The walls were closing in. He looked around the room and saw a sea of faces looking at him with pure disgust. There was no more cool guy act. There was no more smugness. There was just a small, broken man who had done a terrible thing and was finally being forced to look at it. I didn't feel sorry for him. I don't have an ounce of sympathy for someone who uses their strength to shatter a child's life. I felt for Liam. I felt for the kid who would grow up with these scars, physical and emotional, all because the 2 people who were supposed to love him most were too selfish to do what was right. The way Corey looked at the floor after I read those results, it was the look of a man who had finally run out of road. I have seen that look in the eyes of guys I cornered in alleyways and guys I walked into the booking room. It is the moment when the fantasy they have built for themselves, the one where they are the victim or the one where it was all just a big misunderstanding, finally shatters. He wasn't looking at me anymore because he couldn't. He knew that I saw him for exactly what he was. I didn't let up. I leaned over and told him that his silence was the loudest thing in the room. I told him that every second he spent not admitting what he did was another second he was spitting in the face of that little boy. I asked him if he remembered the sound. I keep going back to that because people who haven't seen it don't realize that violence has a sound. A bone breaking under that kind of pressure makes a noise you never forget. I asked him if he heard Liam's arm snap and if he felt powerful in that moment. He started to cry, but they weren't the tears of a man who was sorry for what he had done. They were the tears of a man who was sorry he got caught. There is a massive difference between remorse and self-pity, and Corey was drowning in self-pity. He started whispering that he was stressed, that the baby wouldn't stop crying, and that he just lost it for a second. Lost it? I yelled. I couldn't help it. That phrase is the ultimate cop-out. You lose your keys. You lose your temper and yell at the guy who cuts you off in traffic. You do not lose it and twist a 7-month-old's arm until the bone spirals. That is not losing your temper. That is a choice. That is a conscious decision to inflict pain on something smaller and weaker than you because you can't handle the responsibilities of being an adult. I told him right then and there that being a man means protecting the people who can't protect themselves. It means being the shield, not the sword. I told him he was the furthest thing from a man I had ever seen. I looked at the audience, and I could see the mothers in the front row with tears in their eyes. They knew. Everyone in that room knew that what happened in that house was a tragedy that could have been avoided if one person had just acted like a human being. Then I turned my attention back to Vanessa. She was still sitting there, rocking back and forth, trying to distance herself from the monster sitting next to her. But I wouldn't let her. I told her that she was the one who let him into the house. She was the one who trusted a man over her own gut. I asked her how many times she saw a bruise and told herself it was just a bump. How many times did she hear Liam cry in a way that sounded wrong and decided to stay in the kitchen? The truth is, child abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are almost always signs, there are shadows of what's coming long before the first bone breaks. I told Vanessa that her job as a mother was to be the gatekeeper, and she had left the gate wide open for a wolf. She started arguing with me, trying to say she didn't know Corey was capable of that. I told her that was a lie. You know, you always know when someone you live with has that kind of darkness in them. You see it in the way they treat the dog, the way they talk to you, the way they react when they're frustrated. She chose to ignore the red flags because she didn't want to be alone. I told her that Liam was the one who was truly alone when that arm was being broken. He was alone in his pain because the person who was supposed to be his world was nowhere to be found. I told her that if she didn't get up and walk away from Corey right now, she was telling the world that her son's life didn't matter as much as her relationship. It was a harsh thing to say, but I don't believe in sugarcoating the truth when a child's safety is on the line. I am not a therapist. I am not there to help them work through their issues. I am there to draw a line in the sand and say, this side is right and that side is wrong. Corey finally broke down and admitted he had grabbed him a little too hard. A little too hard. It's amazing the language people use to minimize their crimes. I told him that grabbing a little too hard is what you do to a suitcase, not a baby. I told him that what he did was an assault. It was a betrayal of the most basic human contract. I told him that I spent 20 years on the force dealing with people like him, and the one thing they all have in common is that they think they're the center of the universe. They think their stress, their fatigue, and their problems justify anything they do. I told him that I didn't care about his stress. I didn't care if he had a bad day at work or if he didn't get enough sleep. None of that matters when you're looking at a child in a cast. I made him look at the screen where we had a photo of Liam's tiny hand peeking out from the heavy white plaster. I asked him if he felt like a big guy seeing that. I told him that every time that kid struggles to crawl or can't lift his arm properly, it's because of him. I wanted that guilt to sit on his chest like a ton of bricks. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had taken from that child, the sense of safety that every baby deserves. I could see the security guards in the wings, their faces set in the same grim expressions as mine. We've all seen too much of this. We've all stood by while the system tries to figure out what to do with people like Corey. But on my stage, the system is simple. You do the crime, you face the man. I told Corey that he was lucky I wasn't the one wearing the badge today because I would have enjoyed clicking those cuffs on him. I told him that he was going to leave my show and he was going to have to face the real world where people don't have to be polite to him. I told him that the truth was out now and he couldn't hide behind Vanessa anymore. I turned back to Vanessa and I told her that this was her moment of truth. I told her to look at the man she had been sleeping next to and see the person who broke her son. I asked her if she was going to take him home. I asked her if she was going to let him back into that house where Liam was supposed to be healing. She looked at Corey, then back at me, and for the first time, I saw a spark of something other than fear in her eyes. I saw anger, real, motherly anger. It was about time. She stood up and moved away from him, and I felt a small sense of relief, but I knew the road ahead for her was long. I told her that walking away was just the first step. She had to spend the rest of life making it up to that boy. She had to prove that she could be the mother he needed. I told her that the state was going to be watching her, and they should be. When you fail to protect your child, you lose the right to privacy. You lose the right to be trusted blindly. I told her that I hope she never forgot the feeling of this day because that guilt should be the fuel that drives her to be better. I didn't say it to be mean. I said it because it's the truth. Some things you shouldn't be allowed to forget. Some things should haunt you until they change you. I looked at the two of them, one broken by his own hand, the other by her own silence, and I realized that the only person in this story who actually mattered wasn't even in the room. Liam was the only one who deserved my time, and since I couldn't talk to him, I was going to make sure the people who hurt him felt every bit of the fire I had left. I looked at Corey, and I didn't see a criminal in the legal sense just then. I saw a moral failure standing on two legs. I have spent more than half my life in rooms with people like him, and the one thing that never changes is the way they try to negotiate with their own guilt. They want a discount on their sins. They want me to say, I understand why you did it, but I don't. I will never understand how a man can look at a 7-month-old child, a child who cannot talk back, cannot strike back, and cannot even understand why he is being hurt, and decide that the best way to handle his own internal frustration is to inflict physical agony on that infant. I told Corey that there is a special place for people like him, and it isn't just a jail cell. It's a place of complete isolation from the respect of decent men. I told him that from this moment on, every time he looks in the mirror, he should see the face of a person who broke a baby's arm. That is his new identity. He isn't a boyfriend, he isn't a worker, and he isn't a good guy who made a mistake. He is a child abuser. I let that word hang in the air. It's a heavy word, a word that sticks to you like tar, and I wanted it to cover him completely. I turned back to the audience because I wanted them to understand that this wasn't just about Corey. It was about the culture of silence that allows these things to happen. I told them that if you see something and you don't say something, you are part of the problem. I've seen neighbors who heard the screams and did nothing. I've seen grandmothers who saw the bruises and made excuses. And I was looking at a mother who had done exactly that. Vanessa was trying to find some shred of dignity, but it was gone. I told her that dignity is earned through the protection of the innocent, and she had forfeited hers. I didn't care that she was crying. I've seen a lot of tears, and most of them are for the person crying, not for the victim. I told her that her tears didn't heal Liam's bone. Her tears didn't take away the trauma that child felt when his world turned violent. I told her that she needed to stop feeling sorry for herself and start feeling the weight of the responsibility she had neglected. I told her that being a parent is a privilege, not a right, and it's a privilege that can be revoked when you fail the most basic test of humanity. The atmosphere in the studio was different now. The initial anger had turned into a cold, hard clarity. This is the part of the show that people don't always see on the screen, the moment when the truth has been laid bare and there's nothing left to do but sit in the wreckage of it. I told Corey to get out of the chair. I didn't want him sitting on my stage anymore. I told him he didn't deserve to breathe the same air as the people in that room who actually care about children. He stood up, trying to maintain some level of defiance, but he looked small. When you take away the lies, a bully always looks small. I watched him walk off that stage, and I didn't feel a sense of victory. You don't win in cases like this. You only find the truth. And sometimes the truth is just a different kind of pain. I watched the security team lead him out, and I knew that his life, as he knew it, was over. He had come on this show thinking he could charm his way out of a lie, and he was leaving with the world knowing exactly who he was. I stayed on stage with Vanessa for a moment longer. I wanted to make sure she understood that this wasn't the end of the story for her. It was the beginning. I told her that she had a choice to make every single day for the rest of her life. She could either be the woman who let her son get hurt, or she could be the woman who spent the rest of her life making sure he was never hurt again. I told her that if I ever heard her name again in connection with a child being harmed, I would be the first one at her door. I don't give second chances when it comes to the safety of a baby. I told her to go to her son, to stay at that hospital, and to never let that man or anyone like him near her family again. She nodded, her face pale, and she walked off the stage too. The silence that followed her departure was the loudest part of the whole day. It was the silence of 100 people processing the fact that they had just witnessed the exposure of a monster. I sat down in my chair for a second after they were gone. I do that sometimes, just to let the adrenaline subside. People ask me why I get so angry, why I don't just stay calm and host the show. They don't understand that this isn't a job for me. It's a continuation of the oath I took when I first put on a uniform in Chicago. That oath doesn't expire just because I'm not carrying a gun anymore. My duty is still to the victim. My duty is still to the truth. I thought about Liam lying in that hospital bed, probably confused and in pain, not knowing that the man who was supposed to be his protector was the one who had shattered his world. It makes me sick to my stomach every single time. But it also gives me the fuel to keep doing this. Because as long as there are guys like Corey who think they can hide behind a smile, and women like Vanessa who think they can hide behind I didn't know, I'm going to be here to call them out. I looked into the camera directly at the people watching at home. I didn't need a script for this. I told them that if they are in a situation where they are afraid for a child, or if they suspect that someone they love is hurting a child, they need to act. There is no excuse for staying silent. Fear is not an excuse. Love for the abuser is not an excuse. Nothing is more important than the life and safety of a child. I told them that the truth revealed today wasn't just about who broke a bone. It was about the moral vacuum that exists when people stop caring about what is right and wrong. I ended it the only way I knew how, with a reminder that justice isn't just something that happens in a courtroom. It happens every time someone stands up and says, "Not on my watch." I felt the familiar weight of the world on my shoulders as I stood up to walk off the stage, but it's a weight I'm proud to carry, because at the end of the day, I know that Liam has a better chance now than he did when he woke up this morning. And that is the only thing that matters.